more than ever, we look just like the people next door to us. So in our neighborhoods, on paper, our socioeconomic status, all of these different elements that we look so similar to people, but we feel so disconnected. You would think, well, why do we feel so disconnected if we're all so alike and we have common interests and we have common income and we have common whatever? I think it's because nobody really knows who they are in the first place. So who we look like on paper isn't really who we actually are. And so there's this feeling for a lot of people of the elephant in the room where maybe we are supposed to look alike. Like, let's think about the doctor who doesn't want to be a doctor. Well, they look just like the other doctors on paper, but they don't want to be there.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Ashley Stahl hit rock bottom in her job. After 9/11, she'd set out on a career in national defense. And she was hugely successful in that career until she hit a wall. She was unhappy and knew it just wasn't what she wanted. So she quit. And after many ups and downs, launched a new business, coaching people through just exactly these kinds of crises. It was only by passing through rock bottom herself that Ashley discovered the frameworks described in her book, U-Turn. Ashley is a professional coach, best-selling author, and global spokesperson who has helped clients in 75-plus countries manage their U-turns. Her TEDx talk on intuition and fulfillment is ranked among the top 100 TED Talks, amassing over 8 million views and counting. Her recent book, U-Turn, shares the strategies she's used to help thousands get clarity on what work lights them up and devise an action plan to create a career they love. In this episode, we talk about employees' role in co-creating their work experience, the importance of experimentation in designing fulfilling work, and need finding for employees. We also discuss the 5 core things people need to understand to find their purpose, our often dysfunctional relationship to money and its impact on our work experience, the difference between core interests and core motivators, and other topics. If you enjoy Work for Humans, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, I bring you Ashley Stahl. Ashley Stahl, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today, we're going to be talking a lot about your book, U-Turn, which I want everybody to know is spelled Y-O-U-T-U-R-N. For people who've listened to the show for a long time, they will know that a lot of what we're exploring here is how employers and companies can design better work for people. But what we've realized, guests and I, as we've been going through this project and this journey, is that employees need to come to the table as co-creators. And as co-creators, there's certain things that they need to bring, and a part of that is self-knowledge. Either what do they want, or be willing to experiment and explore what's important to them. And so much of your book is about self-knowledge that I want to go into the different parts of it. First of all, tell me a little bit of the backstory of the book and how you arrived at writing it.
So, I grew up in a house where both sides of the family were on opposite sides of the political aisle. And I just got really good at languages. In middle school, I started taking French. As 9/11 happened, I felt more and more called to help with national security in some way. I think that in the same way that Gen Z was impacted by COVID, the millennial generation was impacted by 9/11. There's very much a pre and post 9/11 world that we entered into. And a lot of us remember where we were standing on that day. So for me, the combination of knowing languages, having a family that was politically engaged, and experiencing having family on the East Coast with 9/11, it just started to push me towards politics. So eventually I became fluent in French. I started taking Arabic at UCLA. I went to graduate school in the UK and poured myself into this career. I learned Dari, which is the language spoken in Afghanistan. And I moved to Washington, D.C. in the recession and gave my all to my job hunt. Ended up getting a ton of job offers, teaching friends how to get job offers because they were all struggling in the recession. And it was just something I had a knack for. And I realized no matter how much I loved being in DOD, in the Department of Defense, I loved helping my friends get job offers. And they said to me, "You should be a career coach." And I don't think in 2011 I even knew what that meant. I was like, "What is a career coach? Like, are they standing on the sideline of your career, like cheering you on like a soccer coach?" So eventually I got the courage to leave national security, start a coaching business. I was only 24. So I was like, okay, I have no career to coach off of. So I basically just helped people with what I knew, which was job hunting. And soon my practice was really full. People's millennials' parents were paying me to help their kids get a job in the recession. And after coaching hundreds of people, I started doing online programs like job hunting courses. I had a huge success and a huge failure in creating my first online course. It was back in the day when webinars were not so trendy. I really mastered webinars and it tipped. And I ended up getting 500,000 email subscribers in 2 months, $5 million in revenue, and thousands of people in my online course. And growing up, my dad lost all of his money. And I was so afraid of that happening to me. My mindset at 26, 27, when this was happening for me. So I hired a bunch of lawyers to basically tell me that I was allowed to be that wealthy that quick. And I ended up having them do all this work, tinkering with my stuff. And next thing I knew, my ads weren't converting. Next thing I knew, I had 10 employees, massive overhead. And I held on for too long. I was overly responsible, telling myself, like, this is on me to figure out. And I ended with negative $500,000 in fetal position on the floor of my apartment. And from there, I ended up getting a book deal. I made a TED talk about figuring out your life. It went super viral, and I got a speaking agent from that. I went on tour talking about failure before COVID. And then I got a book deal and wrote about U-Turn, built the U-Turn podcast. And oddly, one thing that most people don't know that I'm really doing right now, I've been career coaching, but ever since my TED talk hit the top 100, I've had a lot of TED speakers come to me to write their TED talks. So it's just been this shift where I'm being the person I always wanted to be. I opened up my book that I wanted to be a writer, and I went off and worked in national security. And here I am, I'm 36, and I'm the writer that I always wanted to be, finally, myself, fully.
In your story in the book, and for people who might read it, there's a lot of personal stories throughout the book that really give concrete examples of some of the advice that you give. There were a lot of U-turns in there. And the way I hear you describing U-turns is that almost every one of them was in some way hitting rock bottom. That you found yourself in a position where you realized that your career in some way was not working. How do you define what a U-turn is?
For me, the definition is that critical moment where you get radically honest with yourself about something that isn't working. That could be in your relationship, that could be in your career, that could be personally with your health, whatever category or pillar of your life it is. And instead of pushing it down and ignoring it, you honor it for once. You get really honest with the fact that you are where you are and you want it to be better. And you decide that instead of people who make a U-turn in traffic and go back the direction they came, like this lost pendulum, we make a YO U-turn. We come home to ourselves and we get so honest about what we want, which, I mean, happiness is so vulnerable. It's not for the faint of heart. It takes work to be happy. It takes a lot of saying no to be happy. So I think that decision to make a U-turn is that willingness to let something come undone so that you have capacity to create something that you truly want.
So one of the people that I had on the show was Bill Burnett, who wrote Designing Your Life.
Yes, he and I are in the same category on Amazon. We are always ranking close to each other.
You would be very, very close on the shelf if your two books were in a library. And one of the things you said really was very reminiscent of that work, which was about using agile design principles to design your life. And a part of agile design principles is being able to change course, being able to see the opportunity and go to it. And here's the line from your book. If you want clarity on what career path is for you, you must be willing to step into an experimental collaboration with the universe. And clarity comes from engagement, not thought. I thought that was very aligned with an agile design mindset, which is experiment, be curious, try things out, see what you like. Can that be done lightly? Or do I have to hit rock bottom, I guess?
Well, I think that it's a way of life. First of all, I haven't read his book. And now that you're talking about it and the parallels with mine, I have to pick it up and give it a read. I've heard the best things. Secondly, I think that experiments are a way of life and that we are constantly calibrating. And it comes back to our relationship with ourselves. I think a lot of people are not connected to themselves. And if that's the case, the first order of business is just to get connected to yourself because it's really hard to figure out what feels good when you're cut off from your body. And a lot of us have to dissociate from our day to day life because, I mean, let's face it, it's really hard to be here. This is a beautiful place where we live, this planet, but it's also a very challenging place. So, in thinking about that, I think, okay, if you're not feeling connected to yourself, the first order of business is stop thinking about your career and start getting connected to yourself. How does that look? That looks like asking yourself, what are the people, places, things that make me feel like me? What are those for you? Another thing to think about is when you feel like you, what are you doing? So I think the first assignment for anyone, if you want to experiment lightly and not make it like the universe is hitting you with a 2x4 in the face every time you start to face your life, is to start to just get connected with yourself because then you're able to feel the breadcrumbs. Then you're able to feel the nudges. You're able to feel when you feel good. You're able to feel when something actually feels like a no for you. And I think a lot of life is about course correcting when you're cut off from yourself. You're having to undo things all the time. So then you have to do something, find out it's not for you, and then undo it, which is a process, and then redo something else. A lot of that is rooted in not being connected to yourself in the first place. If we can really get back into ourselves, we can feel when something's a no. And then the second piece of the puzzle is being willing to accept that because hearing a no inside of yourself is really inconvenient when you want to fit whatever that bill is on paper that we were told we need to be. So when it comes to being experimental, I think being connected with yourself is the starting point. And then I think from there, you can have conversations. You don't have to get a new job or move to a new country. And all of this builds resilience. It's little things that increase your capacity, your emotional capacity. So that can look like having conversations with people, reading books, listen to podcasts like this. There are light ways to be experimental. If you feel like you might be interested in becoming an artist and retiring in France when you're 80, great. Maybe you need to listen to a podcast where somebody interviews someone who retired in France. Life is an experiment. Start to get curious about the nudges.
So if I'm an employer, if I'm a company, and you're working for me, let's say I'm designing something for you as a customer. Needs finding is an incredibly important part of what I need to do. Is I need to understand what you're looking for from this product that I'm selling you, which happens to be your job at this point. What you're talking about is needs finding when you are the only customer. And so A, needs finding for yourself when you're the customer, which is a deep exploration, just like needs finding is with any product. But then the second thing is that your iteration on your experience comes at some cost. It comes at some time. It comes at some personal risk. You have, at least I have identified 5 core things that people really need to understand about themselves. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through them because they're subtle and they're deep and they are different from each other, but it's not always obvious how. You really need to understand your core nature, your core skill set, your core values, your core interests, and your core motivators. Let's start with core nature. What does that mean?
Yeah, I define core nature as the energy you bring to the room when you walk in. And it's mostly has to be the energy that you bring to the room when you're yourself. So it's helpful to have conversations with people who have a good sense of you. So maybe that's a colleague that you feel like is near you at work, or maybe it's your parents, but asking people, how would you describe the room when I walk in? Another thing I didn't really write about in my book as it relates to core nature that I've thought about in the years to follow is around just your energy levels. Those are a piece of your nature. So if you're an introvert or an extrovert, that's a big deal as far as how you show up in your career and how you show up with your employer. First of all, we can admit, sadly, that the workplace is designed in favor of extroverts. The squeaky wheel usually will get the oil. So it's really on managers to be able to create a space, emotional safety, to encourage the voices of introverts. Another piece of the puzzle is your actual physical health. So I got bit by a tick with Lyme disease I think in middle school and then again like 5 years ago, and I luckily didn't really have that many symptoms, except I would get sick easily. So I didn't have all the like Lyme bedridden stuff that you might hear people have. But if somebody coughed on me, I would get like the highest version of that cold. And I remember thinking in middle school, like, wow, I get too sick too often to be in the workforce. How do my parents work in a world where they only get 2 weeks to be sick? Like, I'm sick for 3 months this year. So I remember thinking, like, I need a career that honors this core nature that I have because these circumstances, although you're not your circumstances, they influence your energy levels. And there's a level of self acceptance and self love to being able to say, these are my energy levels. We're even seeing people in the remote work revolution where people are realizing how, some people want to be in the office because it helps their energy levels. Other people want to be home because the commute or whatever have you takes from their energy levels. And you're seeing a lot of people willing to fight for that. So it's really an energy fight that I'm seeing happening in the workforce. So once you look at your core nature as a whole, it's how would the room change when you walk in? How do people describe you? Feel free to text people in your life and ask that question. And then the second piece of it is, well, now that you know that, what do you know to be true about your physical well being, your physical energy? Are you a morning person? Are you not? Research indicates that being a morning person is actually genetically predetermined. So you can make yourself into a morning person, nature nurture, but I'm all about just going with the flow of who you are. So most of my work days don't start until like noon because I'm very slow in the mornings. I'm very reflective in the mornings. I meditate, I walk my dog. I make my coffee, I journal, like whatever I'm doing in the mornings. And it really sets me up for being me in the day. And I know that not everybody might have that luxury, but I think it's important to at least start being with that question.
So, as a company designing work, traditionally it's been okay, it's 9 to 5, everybody. And it's a very inflexible model for adapting to people's energy and when they're at their best.
Yeah.
I think that also something about core nature that I got from reading the book was that there's a self respect to understanding who you are and being able to show up respecting who you are. When I first joined corporations, I had not been in corporations until my mid-30s. I joined corporations. I thought I had to pass as a corporate person. And so I thought that meant a certain way of dressing and a certain way of speaking and behaving. And I was pretending to be somebody else. What I realized, and it was actually through StrengthsFinder, is that the great thing about corporations is that they like specialization because they are so big, they can have specialists. Being a specialist, it's the same thing as just saying you're weird. And what it means is that a large company can respect your weirdness and can embrace your weirdness as your specialty. And so what I see in this core nature is kind of a willingness to respect your difference in the world.
I love that. And it's interesting. That reminds me of some research. Like research shows that more than ever, we look just like the people next door to us. So in our neighborhoods, on paper, our socioeconomic status, all of these different elements that we look so similar to people, but we feel so disconnected. You would think, well, why do we feel so disconnected if we're all so alike and we have common interests and we have common income and we have common whatever? I think it's because nobody really knows who they are in the first place. So who we look like on paper isn't really who we actually are. And so there's this feeling for a lot of people of the elephant in the room where maybe we are supposed to look alike. Like, let's think about the doctor who doesn't want to be a doctor. Well, they look just like the other doctors on paper, but they don't want to be there. And it's funny, I'm giving this example because it's not like I have a surge of doctors that don't want to be doctors, but I think a lot of people are afraid to really look at that and say, like, okay, this isn't for me. When I think that's one of the most self respecting things you can do. Like, I don't know where these timelines came from in the society we're in, but people seem to think that we shouldn't be making any career pivots by the time we hit 50 or 40. But the reality is, number one, if you know how to pivot effectively, if you live and ride your core skill set, which we haven't talked fully about yet, but I know we will, you can be very effective in repackaging all that you've done and all that you know and making sense of it for where you're headed and not having to take an extreme pay cut. So I think it's really important to not only know your core skill set, which we'll get into, but also to know how to talk about your past in a way that makes sense for people who are listening.
Let's talk about core skill set and how it's different from core nature. By the way, core nature is something I've never heard it described before. And I think it's got a really interesting question. And you said it, I just want to call it out again at the core of it, which is how does the energy in the room change when I come in? I'm not sure I want to know the answer. I'm scared to ask, how the energy changes. So let's get on to core skill set though. What is it and how is it different?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I can't obscure the human experience and capability to 10 different categories and boxes. But what I can say is the majority of people that have come across my desk, that come through my online programs, that have read my book, they usually fall into one primary core skill set. People will read my list of 10 core skill sets and they'll say, well, I resonate with a lot of these. I do think that we have a secondary one and a tertiary one, but I think ultimately we want to build our career sharpening one core skill set that really becomes our superpower because we already have it as a gift and now we're harnessing it even further. So I think the thing to consider with that is, where are you at your best? And, in the same way you ask people, how does the room change when I walk in? Can you ask people, where have you seen me at my best professionally? It might surprise you what people say. What comes easily and is obvious to us is often not so obvious to other people, but we're so in it, we don't even see how obvious it is for us.
What is your core skill set as an example, and what are some others?
There's coordination, which is for the detail oriented people who cross their T's, dot their I's, the project managers, the operations people. I have none of that skill set. There's service. These are the helpers, the humanitarians, the supporters. And it doesn't necessarily lend itself to an exact job, right? Like if service is your core skill set, you might be a nurse, or maybe you are a customer service person. Like there's so many different ways it can look. There's analysis. I actually misunderstood my core skill set. So my core skill set, and I know yours as well, is words. And so anything words, if you look at my bank account, most of my money is going to come from me using words in some way or another. It's the direct tie to my income because it's my zone of genius. It's interesting because when I got my first role in counterterrorism, I remember thinking, oh, I get to write intelligence reports. I get to use creativity. I didn't have this body of work, but I remember thinking, I'm a good writer. This is perfect. What I didn't realize is that just because there's writing involved doesn't mean it's a words job. An intelligence analyst is exactly that. They're an analyst. The problem with that role was that I was outside of my core skill set and I was under the guise that I was in my skill set. I'm more of a creative writer. Now, if you look at me writing TED Talks for changemakers and booking them on stage as an offer, that's how I'm spending my time now. And so the creative writing has become who I am. So I think a lot of people sometimes think, oh, well, my skill set is analysis or another skill set is numbers. And they'll think, oh, I'm great at numbers, but we sometimes misunderstand. And the thing is, sometimes you need to choose one. Maybe you feel like, you know what, these two, like another one is innovation. That's for the entrepreneurs or the second in commands usually, or for the intrapreneurs, the people who are meant to work within an organization, maybe having their own book of business. And that comes down to their relationship with security when you're an innovator. If you're an entrepreneur, maybe you don't need that financial security like you do if you're an intrapreneur. So there's so many different things that we can look at when choosing our core skill set. But I tell people this whole idea of doing what you love, I think it really has gotten people so stuck because the truth of the matter is that we can't, I don't think, put the pressure on ourselves to love everything we do. I think the real work is in saying, I'm going to do what makes me grow. I'm going to do what sharpens me. To me, the real purpose in your career is contribution. We live in a world that's moving forward. And to me, being a participant in that, there's fulfillment in that. And if you can be a participant that's using your gifts, I think there's so much more fulfillment there. So I always tell people, if you're in a job that 70 to 80% of the time you're leading with what is your core skill set, you're in your zone of genius, with maybe the rest of it can be a zone of growth, a zone of good. I think you're in a pretty good spot. And a lot of people ask me, well, should I stay or should I go? Am I in the right job? And I always tell them, well, it depends. Do you feel like you're sharpening your skill set? And if you do, you're in a pretty good spot. I mean, the second piece of it is your core values. And if you feel like they're being violated by your career, which might influence if you need to change it up. But these are all different considerations that I have.
I recognize a pattern I've seen there. And as somebody looking at telling people about the work, being able to tell them what core skill set it's going to draw upon, I saw a lot of graduate students in literature who went into it because they like to read. That's like going to taxidermy school because you like dogs. It's not actually what a literature program is about. It's not about reading. It's about analysis, really. It's about parting things into their pieces and then stitching them back up together with little glass eyeballs. I mean, it's not about war. It's not even about, I have some negative things to say about literature, about my studies in literature. And by the way, I was able to cope in that environment because I have a strong analytical ability, but it was real work to do it. And so, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves as employers is, how are we going to describe jobs to people in such a way that they know what they're getting into? And we fail all the time. I have done my very best in interviews to say to people, look, this is what's terrible about this job. You need to understand that. And they don't believe me. And then later they say, yes, you told me. So a couple layers there. One is that employers need to be good at saying what they're going to be producing. People need to get good at hearing it if employers are doing that. So it's possible that somebody has a core skill set that leads them into something that they don't like. Is that possible? Or is it rewarding enough to be good at something that you're probably going to like it?
Well, we can't overlook your core values. So I really think there's what you do, which is your core skill set, your zone of genius, where you can contribute best and highest. And I mean, life is really fun when you're natural, right? Like it's fun to be you. So that's the first piece. But the second piece is core values. That's the how. So what you do, given that we know that 50% of people leave their job because they don't like their boss. I just read that statistic. What we can assume to be true here is that how your job looks matters just as much as what your job is. How your job looks, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're in the workforce, has everything to do with core values. To me, your core values by definition are the non-negotiable principles by which you live your life. So what I mean by that is, what are the values? What are the principles that when you think about your life, these are crucial parts of you? And one of the mistakes that people make when they think about core values is they're aspirational. I had an entertainment lawyer come in and she told me that peace was a core value. And I'm like we laughed together. I'm like, I don't think you're that peaceful. Like we just kind of like had a good laugh. And we realized, no, like that's an aspiration for her. And aspirations are really important, especially if you want to manifest a new vision, a new life, but they're still aspirational. Your core values are core pieces of you that without them, people are going to think something's up. I have a sense of humor. So if I see my friends for an hour and a half, and I'm not funny at all, they're going to think something's wrong. They will say to me, are you okay? Like, you don't seem like you. That's because humor is a core value. One of the most painful things we can experience in our career that kind of sends us into a spin is when our job, our work is violating a core value. So let's say you're a words person and you're an extrovert and you're working in sales. You're crushing it. You're great at selling. You love people. You're great at business development. But here's one thing, you're miserable. Why? Well, it doesn't sound like it's a what core skill set kind of issue. It sounds like it might be a how issue. So my next question for somebody is, what is it about your work that you're not liking? What is it about it that's zapping your energy? Usually so I had a client who he told me, I think he was in his 50s, seasoned professional, and he told me that his integrity felt so compromised in his work because he was selling for an oil company. And they had these oil spills and he was reading about them on the news. And he just felt like he doesn't want to be a salesperson for a company that he feels like isn't doing good in the world. So sometimes you're in the right skill set, but how it's looking is wrong. And that's really a culture and a core value issue. And you can course correct that quite easily. And I think a lot of people, they overreact to that and they make that U-turn in traffic instead of the YO U-turn, where they just run the other direction. Oh, well, sales might not be for me. It's like, no, that's your core skill set. And words can look like many things, right? So it doesn't have to be sales. You could be a talent agent. You can be a real estate agent. There's so many ways to use words in a way that transfers empowerment or inspiration to people. But I think it's less about what is the skill and more about what do you need to be you. I need a lot of balance. Like, as I said with my Lyme disease, you're not going to find me running around and not taking care of myself. And no matter what I'm doing, no matter how much it's using my skill set, if I don't have balance, I'm not going to be into it.
So I'm going to recap a little bit. Core nature, you can have half a dozen things that you would list as your core nature. Core skill set, you get one. You can have some secondary ones, but you get one big one. Core values, the ones that you've listed, is there must be 60 of them. I don't know, 40 of them anyway. And you say select 10, at least as a starter kit. Can you just give us a few examples of core values so that we can get a sense for what might be in that category?
Yeah. Core values, there's a big list in my book, and I think you could probably Google one too, but they're words like family, spirituality, balance, connection, depth, intimacy, truth, honesty, achievement, success, self expression, creativity, innovation. These are all words that represent core values.
And I would say it's not quite an exhaustive list. Discovery is not on there. Invention's on there.
Yeah. Oh,
but
yeah.
discovery is not on there.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, you might find others, but it gives you a sense of what they are, of what can be in your core values.
Well, and what's important is to define them.
For yourself. Right. You say that,
Yeah.
right? Which is that, okay, pick them, but then define them, because what that word means to you may not be what it means to anybody else.
Exactly. I had a client once who told me adventure for him was a core value, and that meant going skydiving. And then this other girl told me adventure for her meant trying new restaurants in Miami. So we got to define the terms and know what they really mean for us. And that's the thing, is there's nuance. Somebody might think learning and growth are the same. I think they're different. For me, if you value learning, that means collecting information. To me, growth is applying the information. Some people simply enjoy having information. So I think it's really about knowing thyself enough to be able to assess these things.
Now, I want to get on to core interests and core motivators, but before we get there, I want to talk about something that is in your book that we've never talked about on the show, and that's people's relationship to money. When you are coaching somebody as a manager, one of the challenges you face is that people don't know what they want. Maybe half of people can't articulate what they want yet. But another challenge is that there's a gamesmanship, which is that people are interested in money. They think that's the thing that's on the table to negotiate with. And what I learned from your book is the degree to which people have dysfunctions in their relationship to money.
Oh, yeah.
Can you describe what some of those dysfunctions are and how they might interfere with our selection of work or our experience of work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, right now, anybody listening, if you just fill in the blank with the first word that pops into your head when I open up a sentence, so you can complete the sentence, money is. Like, what's the first thing that you thought? Money is easy, money is hard, money is scary, money is stressful. What is it? We come into the world, tabulosa rasa, I believe is the Latin term, as a blank slate. And then our thermostat for what we're comfortable with is largely set by our caretakers, whoever they are, because we hear conversations and we believe them. They are our lifeline. So I know a lot of people talk about this, so I always cringe as a personal development professional talking about childhood, but it's like we can't escape it. It's so true. If I look at my life, I lived under my parents' authority, and I love my parents, but they have their own way of thinking. Until I was 21, I'm 36 years old now. So I spent 15 years on my own terms and 21 years in their thinking, steeping in it like at the tea bag in your cup right now. They're the water on the tea bag, just there it is, or vice versa. So it's almost like I've still spent more time in their programming and the way that they think than my own. And in those fundamental first 10 years of your life, you don't really, first of all, your brain's not even formed until you're 26. So we are collecting information and setting our thermostat based on our parents for so many years. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of self-compassion to undo that. My dad lost a lot of his money and had to close his business. He was a really successful entrepreneur, and then he lost it all. And I remember thinking as a kid, money's going to kill me, because when he had to fix it and nearly claim bankruptcy, he was hustling at a level where I could see he was miserable. Like he had to work so hard to pay the bills for all of us. And I think that's where it's so important that we're able to pay attention to these high impact, intense moments in our lives and say, like, how did these influence the way that I'm seeing my life? How did this influence the way that I'm seeing things? I know with my dad losing his money, I believe that money's going to kill me. I believe that the pursuit of it at least was going to kill me. That money is fun, but it's also miserable, and that you have to work super hard to get it. And then it's even harder to keep it. And what that translated into in my 20s was, why fight so hard for it? Why? If it's this much of a whole drama, why fight for it? I had to do so much work on my money mindset. I ended up losing, like I said, millions of dollars. And it's a self fulfilling prophecy. My dad lost everything. I made a bunch of money, didn't want to lose everything. I hired a bunch of lawyers because I was so scared I would just be like that and lose everything. And then I lost everything because I was so scared of losing everything. I followed every instruction that they said. The thing about the law is it's a gray zone. There's a lot of case law that's gray. Lawyers are always going to find things that you can be more optimal with. And I listened to every single thing to the point where I sabotaged my business and lost all my money. So I think it's really important that we are able to pay attention to these things.
Yeah, the story you told was when your father lost his business, he had a panic attack. And he said, I think this is going to kill me. And you'd never seen your father be afraid or helpless. And that association with money for you made, if you were going to finish the sentence, money is deadly.
Yeah.
Money is
Painful.
painful. And so money's an incredibly important design element in our work. It's one of the most foundational ones. When I ask people what they want from work, people say, well, of course, money, and then they go on to other things. Money is one of the most commoditized things, which is that the dollar one company gives me is identical to the dollar another company gives me. So it's not like money is different from place to place. There's a question of degree. And when people say they want money, in my research, they say, I want it to take care of my family and myself. So it's for safety. It's for self-defense. I want it to buy other experiences. And some people will admit that they want money to keep score of how they're doing against their peers or against their parents or somebody else or against their own targets. But I always kind of feel like it obscures the most important things in work. Am I wrong about that? Like, am I de-emphasizing the money inappropriately when I do that?
I mean, there's so much research that shows that there's a certain amount and a tipping point where you're not actually more happy or fulfilled. I think that a lack of money definitely creates a lot of stress, right? But the abundance of it, sometimes, I don't remember who said that quote, but it's like, how much money is enough? And the person said more. I don't know. Having lost all my money, I kind of lived in the hard knocks of being in a really successful crowd from my own success financially and wondering, like, are these people still going to value me and love me when I totally just failed and lost all my money? Because a lot of our hangouts, I don't want to say they were built on money because they were really built on connection, but they could do a lot of fun things that I needed to be able to afford to do. So, for example, if they wanted to go on a yacht trip, I needed to have my money for that. So I remember thinking, like, am I going to lose these people because of this? And it was so powerful for me to realize that deep connection and relationships are going to hold you. And I think there's an innate freedom in facing your worst fear. Losing all my money, just like my dad, was my worst nightmare. And I did it. And I don't know. It's like your fear isn't so scary when you face it. I don't wish it for anyone. It's definitely not a vibe that I want for anyone listening. But I do think that when we over focus on money, we under focus on the non tangibles. And some of those might be growth, opportunity, relationships. And there's something to that. I think a lot about that with politics. You see a lot of people working on Capitol Hill, and we can Google their salaries. If you work on the Hill, your salary is public information. They're underpaid. It's a government job and they are underpaid. And they're working a lot and they have a lot of stress on them. I've been on the Hill, I know it. And yet, once they leave the Hill, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, all those relationships get them to quintuple their income when they're ready for it. So I think the question is really like, what do you really want? What is your true core skill set? And here's the thing. People who are in their zone of genius, opportunities are coming to them all the time. And opportunities can be one of the highest forms of distraction, just as much as they can be abundant, right? Like if you take the wrong opportunities, you're kind of like not paying attention and then you're having to undo them and waste all this time. But when you're really in your zone of genius, people notice you. Because, I mean, if we think about it now, think about your work. There's someone doing an impeccable job and you noticed it. And there's a lot of people doing an okay job, right? Like my project manager, Kirsten, she runs my production for my podcast. Her company's called Swell Production House. And she's excellent at what she does. And my life is so much easier because of her. And it's like, wow, you're really good at coordination. That's your skill set. That girl crosses her T's, dots her I's, and like nothing gets like in the past 4 years, I don't think we've missed anything on my podcast, because of her production. So I think when somebody's that good, people start to approach them with opportunities, and it becomes on them to know thyself and be able to filter through those opportunities by saying yes or no to them. And I think it's those yeses and nos that really define your career and catapult you into new levels of opportunity that maybe you never thought about for yourself.
Recently on the show, I had Simone Stolzoff, who wrote a book, The Good Enough Job, that recently came out. And his point was that we all expect too much from work, that work is not family, even though it may say it is. Work is not your self-worth. Work is not your religion. Although many of us, it's the only place now that we get together with others, like we used to in church. He went through each of these things. And do you feel that we might expect too much?
From work? Yeah, for sure. I think just the idea that we should love our job is out of control. I think we should really like what we're doing. And more importantly, we should be growing from what we're doing. That to me is success. So I think the pressure people put on to be like, I want to love what I do and I want to be growing and I want this to fulfill me. And it's the same as relationships. We're expecting, just like Esther Perel says, we're expecting from our relationship what a village used to provide. And so I think it's really important to be as in reality as possible with ourselves. And that doesn't mean to give up on your dreams. It means to realize that there is a dignity to being in a process, and figuring out your career is often a process. And that's the cost of admission, is to entering into that process, to calibrating in those experiments. And if you're not willing to pay the cost of admission, it gets really difficult for you to actually have that fulfillment that you want.
What is your money blueprint when you talk about that? What are the components of that?
Yeah, great question. I think your money blueprint is the fundamental belief system that you have set as it relates to money. So I would just look at your patterns, right? Like, do you compulsively spend it? Do you hoard it and save it? Do you feel like you have a healthy and clean relationship with it? My book actually has a quiz on what your money personality is. And I think that we always have, we're works in progress, but your blueprint is what's fundamentally hardwired from your upbringing. And it takes a lot of work and presence to start to notice. One thing you can look at is, let's say you're an overspender. Ask yourself, what are the words you use in your head to justify the overexpense? What do you say in your head? Do you say, whatever, I deserve it? Or if you start to notice how you talk to yourself before you do the thing, before you do the pattern in your blueprint, you start to interrupt it and give yourself that space to make a decision of like, is this still how I want my blueprint? And the problem and the challenge with growth is sometimes it's not about having awareness. There's a point where a level of awareness is really toxic if you're not doing anything about it. There's way too many people out there saying, the reason I'm this way is because my mom did this and now I'm that. I get all that. There's a lot of value there, but it's toxic if you just sit there and know it and don't change it or do something with it. Sometimes the growth is sitting in the discomfort and self-soothing through not doing the same thing. That's the real growth. And that's what I want for everybody who's listening, is to feel that sense of personal power where they're willing to really take care of themselves and choose differently.
There are two other core things that people need to know about themselves that you've described: your core interests and your core motivators. Let's talk about interests first. It sounds so much like they're the same to me, but they're not. So what are they and how are they different?
So your core interests are your interests. So I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in cupcakes. I love gluten-free cooking and baking. I'm interested in fashion. These are all interests. but your interest should really be the backdrop of your career. Your skill set is really the foreground. You lead with your skill set. So for me, my skill set is writing, and I'm writing TED Talks for people who hire me to write them. But my interest is personal development. So I do get some TED Talks that are personal development focused, but ultimately the creativity that comes with my writing, that's the foreground. That's the skill set that I'm sharpening. Behind that is this interest that holds my skill set in a way that is very interesting for me. But I think people need to first lead with their skill set and follow with their interest. You can be a coder at Disney the same day you can be a coder for a sports company. So it's important to kind of take a look at your long-term career and where you're sharpening your skills versus just your interests. I think that they're worth considering, but not leading with. Your motivator is different for everybody. Some people are motivated by meaning, right? And that has to do with your core values. Some people are motivated by money, and other people are motivated by ease. And there's no shame in what motivates you. I think we live in a world where everybody says they're fine. And sometimes when people say they're fine, they're just not in touch with their pain. Other times, people are actually fine. They just do want a job that pays their bills. And that's fine for them. That's enough for them. So I think it's really important that we get really honest with ourselves about what is enough for us. And in doing that, I think we really free ourselves up for being who we want to be.
Yeah. I've also, in interviewing people, I've found people who speak about what motivates them, but I think it's a story. So one person who said, I'm coin operated. That was exactly her sentence. That's all I want. You go to lunch with that person, and what they complain about work is one of the other core motivators. For instance, like visibility is one of the things that's on, it's the V in the list. Accomplishment, training, ease, spending. So it's these other things that are there. It's a real challenge in terms of designing work for people is the say-do gap between asking people what they want from work. People say what they want from work. You try to deliver that, and it's not actually, it's what they think they should like from work. So here's one of my closing questions that I ask everybody. And to give you a little bit of background, it's because I use marketing tools to understand what people want from the product work that companies are selling. What job do you hire your job to do for you?
So this actually comes down to core energy levels. As I write all these TED speeches and get them booked, number one, I don't like doing the booking. So I have a booker that I'm partnered with that gets the talk with almost 100% success. So I let her do that and pay her for that. Secondly, I've learned as a creative that I don't like to fully finish the speech. I need a finisher. And so I love to have the vision. I love to write the opener. I love to write the first out of the 3 talking points or whatever the structure is of the speech I'm doing. But I don't like to write the conclusion. I don't like to write the final points. My creativity wants new dopamine, and I'm totally okay with that. So I've hired out a booker who I've partnered with, and I've hired out a speechwriter who helps me finish my talks, helps me do research on my talks. I don't want to be in the weeds of the research. That's more the analysis skill set or the coordinating skill set, not the words core skill set. So I've outsourced those pieces, and it's created a lot of art, watching people step on stage and give these talks. And I think it's powerful because it's a super highway to their career, watching them get up there and share their message. Where else do you have 40 million subscribers on YouTube waiting to hear your message? So it's really been an honor to harness my creativity in the way that feels so true for me.
So there's a couple of things in there that are patterns that I have heard. One of them is I hire my job to do the books. And what that means is I work for an employer because I don't like to do accounting. And when I was self-employed, I had to do the accounting. And so you hire your workplace to outsource the things you don't like. So that's one. I hire my job to see others shine, which is a part of what you were describing when you talked about people getting up on stage and doing well. I hire my job to invent or create, which is the part, that's the jelly in the jelly donut for you. That's the core, right? Is that place where you can discover and invent the message. What does your job cost you?
Ooh, I think it costs me my own creativity sometimes. Some people come in for the TED Talks, and in order to get booked for TEDx, you really need to have an idea worth spreading. And there's a lot of great people who come in with a lot of great insight that I can channel into speech writing for them. but sometimes they don't have a message. Like in my book, the message is don't do what you love, do what you are. That really rides the book forward. Some people don't have that core message. And so in taking their talk and writing it for them and getting them booked on stage, they're essentially also paying me for an intellectual property transfer. I'm handing people ideas that they might build programs or courses off of. And to me, that's, I guess my creativity and the relationship I have with it is it's limitless. The downloads, insights, and mind shifts that I can come up with never end. And it's on me to keep doing that. But it costs me ideas that I could own as my own.
That's a serious cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you work for a corporation, your intellectual property is not your own. It's not that different from that, but I have found that uncomfortable.
But when you're an entrepreneur, it's different. Yeah.
Well, and it's uncomfortable even if you're in a corporation. You're like, yeah, I signed that paper, but this one's really good. It's like,
yeah.
On the other hand, maybe the open door there is the synthesis that you're going to be able to have of all of those ideas into something else. Maybe those deep dives, somebody else is essentially hiring you and paying you to do a deep dive into an idea. You come out with something, but if you do that 10 times, it might be an 11th thing.
Exactly. And that's the thing is people pay for curation. It's not just, people always say like, oh, there's no new ideas out there. But I think the real lens on that is that it's really about how you share the idea. Like in one of my online courses about job hunting, I talk about salary negotiation. And the way that I relay to people to negotiate is to keep their tone like they're ordering a sandwich at Subway. It's neutral. Like the money is neutral. You don't need to have anxiety in your tone. Talk about it like I'd like pickles. How about some turkey? How about some cheese? So when I talk to people about salary negotiation, that's the way that I express it to them. And I think ultimately that's something that we are all providing is our own way of expressing ideas and curating information, right? Like people will pay for, I've read every single book on this and here's the conclusions I've drawn.
Do you get satisfaction even if you're not the one taking that idea forward, seeing your idea taken forward into the world?
Yeah, definitely. I love seeing people feel what they can feel when because some people I write their whole speech, other people I write pieces of it and they collaborate with me. It's all the same investment on my end. So it's so nourishing to watch these people share a message that is so, sometimes you have something you need to say and it hurts you to hold it in. It's like I'm helping them. There's like a catharsis. And I think that's something that we both get to have as words people is like in the same way someone who's feeling sick and they don't know what their diagnosis is, they're like traveling to different doctors to figure out what it is. Even by the time they get the diagnosis, maybe they get a bad diagnosis. They don't want that diagnosis, but they're still relieved because they put words to what it is. Now they know what they're working with. I think as words people, I have the opportunity to help people heal through putting words to things in everyday life that people are still trying to process. And by putting words to them, I'm able to move things forward for people. And that means a lot to me, whether it's coming out of my mouth or someone that I wrote their speech for.
Right. This is a question I very rarely ask, which is, what's the favorite tool of your trade?
I think Gestalt therapy is like really profound and powerful. So Gestalt, the philosopher, he developed a therapeutic method where, he believes that we all have different aspects of ourselves. And I think we can resolve a lot through having a conversation with those two aspects. So in Gestalt therapy, you can put two chairs down on the floor and you can sit in one chair and that's one aspect of you. Like maybe it's the part of you that doesn't want to do something. And you sit in the other chair, it's the part of you that does want to do the thing. And you have those two parts of you have a conversation. I think that the amount of self-wisdom and resolution that we have is so potent. And sometimes we're outsourcing decision-making when really we have what it takes to make decisions.
I think one of the last things I want to say is I really love the way you boiled it up, which is don't do what you love, do what you are, as the key message. The reason that's such an important thing is that when I approach the question of job with marketing questions, I'm asking you, what do you want from this product? I'm asking you essentially, what do you love? And the idea that that might be a fundamentally wrong question to ask, and that the deeper question is to ask, who are you to create a work experience that's the right one? I think that's a very, very fundamental difference that I'm going to have to think about for a while.
Thank you for saying that. And thank you for having me and asking such great questions and reading my book. And I hope it really stirs something for someone.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.